I had been a governess for 7 years when I learned that some houses do not want to be entered, and some men do not want to be saved. The carriage that carried me to Greystone Manor moved through fog so thick I could no longer see the horses pulling me forward, only hear the muffled rhythm of their hooves against wet stone, as though I were being delivered not to an employer, but to some ancient, waiting mouth. The letter had arrived 3 weeks prior, brief and formal, penned in a hand so controlled it seemed almost violent in its precision. A widower of significant rank required a governess for his daughter, aged 7. References checked, salary generous, immediate placement required, no mention of warmth, no inquiry into my philosophy of education or temperament with children. Just the bare architecture of need, stripped of everything soft. I should have recognized it then, that tone. I should have understood that a man who writes as though he is signing a legal document rather than inviting a woman into his home is a man who has forgotten or chosen to forget how to be human. But I was tired of London, tired of the narrow boarding house room where I had been living between positions, tired of the particular loneliness that belongs to women like me who are educated enough to be uncomfortable among servants and poor enough to be invisible among the families we serve. So I wrote back. I accepted. I packed my 2 trunks, my books, my modest collection of sheet music, and I came. The manor emerged from the fog like something pulled from deep water, all gray stone and narrow windows, its edges softened by mist until it seemed almost uncertain of its own shape. Ivy climbed the eastern wall in dark tangles, and the grounds, what I could see of them, stretched away into nothingness, swallowed by the November evening. A single light burned in an upper window. I watched it as the carriage slowed, that lonely gold square, and I felt something tighten in my chest, some premonition I could not name. The housekeeper who met me at the door was a woman of perhaps 50, her face as gray and smooth as the stone around us. "Mrs. Daventry," she said, and her voice was kind, which surprised me. She took my cloak, gestured for the driver to bring my trunks, and led me through a hall so vast and cold I could see my breath misting in the air. The walls were lined with portraits, generations of pale aristocratic faces staring down with expressions ranging from boredom to disdain. None of them smiled. At the end of the hall, a staircase curved upward into shadow. "His Grace is in his study," Mrs. Daventry said quietly. "He will receive you there." I followed her up the stairs, my skirts whispering against the stone, my heart doing something peculiar and unsteady beneath my ribs. I had met many employers over the years. Some had been kind, some indifferent, some inappropriately forward in ways that made my position precarious and my departure inevitable. But I had never felt this sense that I was walking toward something irreversible, some threshold that once crossed could not be uncrossed. The study was warm at least, a fire burning in the grate and the walls lined with books that reached from floor to ceiling. A large desk dominated the center of the room, its surface covered in papers, ledgers, correspondence. And behind it, standing with his back to me, looking out the window into the fog-drowned grounds, was the Duke of Greystone. He did not turn when I entered. Mrs. Daventry announced me, said my name as though it were a fact rather than an introduction, and then withdrew, closing the door softly behind her. I stood there in the center of that warm, book-lined room, waiting. The silence stretched. I could hear the fire crackling, the faint whistle of wind against the window pane, the slow tick of a clock somewhere in the shadows, and I could see his reflection in the dark glass of the window. A tall figure, broad-shouldered, his face obscured by the angle and the firelight. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, roughened by something I could not identify. Exhaustion, perhaps, or grief so old it had worn grooves into his throat. "Miss Ashford," he said, "you come highly recommended." "Thank you, Your Grace," I replied, keeping my voice steady, professional. "I am grateful for the opportunity." He turned then, and I saw his face for the first time. He was younger than I had expected, perhaps 35, with dark hair silvered at the temples and eyes of such a pale, cold gray they seemed almost colorless in the firelight. His features were handsome in the severe way of men who have forgotten how to smile, all sharp lines and controlled stillness. He looked at me with an expression I could not read, something between assessment and dismissal, and I felt suddenly aware of my own plainness, my worn traveling dress, the strands of hair that had come loose from my chignon during the journey. "My daughter is 7 years old," he said, moving around the desk, but not approaching me, maintaining the distance as though it were a physical boundary he had drawn between us. "Her previous governess left rather suddenly. I require someone who will be steady, reliable, and discreet." The last word hung in the air between us, weighted with meaning I did not yet understand. "Of course, Your Grace," I said. "Discretion is essential in any position of trust." Something flickered across his face, too quick to name. He nodded once, a sharp, controlled movement, and gestured toward a chair. I sat. He remained standing, his hands clasped behind his back, his posture military in its rigidity. "My daughter's name is Charlotte," he continued. "She is a sensitive child, imaginative. She has been through a great deal in her short life, and I will not tolerate any approach that is harsh or unkind." "Is that clear?" "Entirely clear," I said. And I meant it. I had no patience for cruelty toward children, had seen too much of it in some of the houses where I had worked. "Your Grace, may I ask what subjects you wish me to focus on in her education?" "The usual," he said, waving a hand dismissively. "French, music, watercolors, literature. But more than that, I need you to be a steady presence, someone she can rely upon, someone who will not leave." Again, that weight, that implication of something unspoken. I leaned forward slightly. "Your Grace, forgive me, but you mentioned the previous governess left suddenly. May I ask why?" His expression closed, shuttered like a window slammed against a storm. "That is not your concern, Miss Ashford. You are here to teach my daughter, not to inquire into matters that do not involve you." The rebuke was sharp, unmistakable. I felt heat rise in my cheeks, a mixture of embarrassment and something else, something that felt oddly like anger. "I am sorry," I said quietly. "I meant no impertinence. I only wished to understand the household so that I might serve better." He studied me for a long moment, and I forced myself to hold his gaze, to not look away, as every instinct of deference and self-preservation urged me to do. Finally, he sighed, a sound so weary it seemed to come from some deep, exhausted place inside him. "My wife died 3 years ago," he said, and his voice had changed, softened into something raw and human. "Charlotte was 4. She has not entirely accepted the loss. She has, at times, expressed beliefs that are," he hesitated, searching for the word, "fanciful. The previous governess found this unsettling. She chose to leave. I felt something shift in my understanding, a piece of the puzzle sliding into place. Fanciful beliefs," I repeated carefully. "You mean she speaks of her mother as though she were still present?" He looked away, back toward the window and the fog beyond. "Something like that," he said. "I do not wish to discuss it further. I need to know if you are capable of managing such a situation with patience and reason, without indulging fantasies that will only cause the child further distress." I considered this. I had worked with grieving children before, had seen how loss could twist reality in a young mind, creating elaborate stories to fill the unbearable emptiness. It was not madness. It was survival. "I am capable, Your Grace," I said, "and I will be patient. But I will also be honest with her, in ways appropriate to her age and understanding. Children deserve truth, even when it is painful." He turned back to me, and for the first time, something like approval flickered in those cold gray eyes. "Good," he said. "Then we understand each other. Mrs. Daventry will show you to your room. You will meet Charlotte in the morning. Breakfast is at 8. You will take your meals with her in the nursery." I stood, understanding I was being dismissed. "Thank you, Your Grace," I said. I had reached the door when his voice stopped me. "Miss Ashford." I turned. He was standing by the fire now, one hand resting on the mantel, his face half in shadow. "If my daughter speaks to you about her mother," he said slowly, as though each word cost him something, "I would ask that you inform me immediately. Do not encourage these conversations. Do not." He stopped. "Do not give her false hope." "False hope of what, Your Grace?" I asked. "That the dead can return," he said, and his voice was so quiet I almost did not hear it. "That grief can be undone." I wanted to say something, wanted to offer some comfort to this man who stood before me like a figure carved from ice and sorrow. But I did not know him, did not know what wounds he carried or what words he needed to hear. So I simply nodded and left him there, alone in his warm study, staring into the fire as though it might give him answers to questions he was too afraid to ask aloud. Mrs. Daventry led me up another flight of stairs to the 3rd floor, where the nursery and governess quarters were located. My room was small, but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, a desk by the window, and a wardrobe that smelled faintly of lavender. The window looked out over the back gardens, or what I assumed were gardens, though all I could see was fog, thick and shifting, with the dark shapes of trees rising through it like drowning men reaching for air. "I will have your trunks brought up shortly," Mrs. Daventry said. "Charlotte is already asleep, so you will meet her in the morning." "She is." The housekeeper paused, choosing her words carefully. "She is a dear child, gentle, but she has an active imagination, as His Grace mentioned." I smiled. "Most children do," I said. "It is not a failing." Mrs. Daventry returned the smile, but there was something sad in it, something that made me think she wanted to say more, but did not dare. She bid me good night and left me alone. I unpacked slowly, hanging my few dresses in the wardrobe, arranging my books on the desk, placing the small framed photograph of my parents on the nightstand. They had been dead for 10 years, my father of fever, my mother of heartbreak, and I was alone in the world, in the way that only women without family or fortune can be alone. This position, this room, this cold manor in the fog, it was not what I had dreamed of as a girl, but it was what I had, and I would make it enough. I was brushing out my hair, preparing for bed, when I heard it, a child's voice, high and clear, coming from somewhere nearby. "Mama. Mama, are you there?" I froze, the brush still tangled in my hair. The voice came again, not frightened, but hopeful, almost eager. "Mama, I saw you in the garden. Why did you go away?" I set down the brush and moved to the door, opening it quietly. The hallway was dark, lit only by a single lamp at the far end. The voice was coming from the room next to mine, the nursery. I hesitated. It was not my place to intrude on the child's private grief. But something in that voice, that innocent hopefulness, pulled at me. I knocked softly. "Charlotte?" I called. "Are you all right?" The voice stopped. I waited. Then quietly, almost shyly, a small voice answered. "Who are you?" I opened the door a crack. The nursery was larger than my room, filled with toys and books, a rocking horse by the window, a small table set for tea. And in the bed, sitting up with her blankets pulled to her chin, was a little girl with dark curls and eyes that were the same pale gray as her father's. "My name is Miss Ashford," I said gently. "I am your new governess. I heard you talking and wanted to make sure you were not unwell." She studied me with a seriousness that seemed too old for her small face. "I was talking to Mama," she said simply. "She comes at night sometimes. I see her in the garden." My heart contracted. I moved into the room, sitting carefully on the edge of her bed. "You miss your Mama very much, don't you?" I said softly. She nodded. "But she is not far away," she said. "She walks in the fog. I have seen her. She wears her white dress, the one with the pearls, and she looks sad. I think she is lost." I reached out and smoothed a curl from her forehead. "It is natural to see the people we love in our memories," I said carefully. "Our hearts hold them close, and sometimes it feels as though they are truly near us." "But I really see her," Charlotte insisted, her voice taking on a note of urgency. "Not in my memory. In the garden. She walks by the stone bench where the roses used to grow. Every night when the fog comes, she is there." I did not know what to say. I remembered the Duke's words, his warning not to encourage these fantasies. But I also remembered my own losses, the way grief could make the world feel thin and strange, as though the dead were only a breath away. "Will you tell me about her?" I asked instead. "What do you remember most about your Mama?" Charlotte's face softened. "She smelled like roses," she said. "And she sang to me at night, French songs. Papa does not sing anymore. He does not talk about her either. He gets angry if I mention her. Perhaps it hurts him to remember," I suggested gently. "But why?" Charlotte asked, and there was such genuine confusion in her voice, such childlike inability to understand why love should cause pain. If we remember her, she is still with us. Is that not better than forgetting? Out of the mouths of babes, I thought. This small girl understood something her father had spent 3 years trying to deny. Yes, I said quietly. I think you are right. Remembering is better than forgetting. She smiled then, a real smile, bright and trusting. I like you, Miss Ashford, she said. Will you stay? I will stay, I promised, and I meant it, though I did not yet know what that promise would cost me. I tucked her back into bed, smoothed her blankets, and was turning to leave when she caught my hand. Miss Ashford, she whispered, if you see Mama in the garden, will you tell me? Will you tell me if she looks happy? I squeezed her small hand gently. I will tell you, I said. Now sleep, dear one. Morning will come soon enough. I left her then, closing the door softly behind me, and stood in the dark hallway trying to steady my breathing. A child's grief, a father's guilt, a dead woman walking in the fog. It should have been simple, explainable. The imagination of a lonely little girl, the tricks of mist and shadow, nothing more. But as I stood there in the darkness, I heard it, faint, distant, barely audible beneath the wind. A woman's voice, singing. The melody was French, something slow and sad, and it came from somewhere outside, somewhere in the fog-drowned gardens below. I moved to the window at the end of the hall, the one that overlooked the back of the house, and there, standing by a stone bench, barely visible through the mist, was a figure in white, a woman. She stood utterly still, her face turned up toward the house, toward the windows where Charlotte and I stood, separated by walls and grief, and 3 years of unspoken truth. As I watched, she raised one pale hand, as though reaching toward us, or beckoning, or warning. Then the fog shifted, and she was gone. I did not sleep that night. I lay in my narrow bed, listening to the wind, to the old house settling around me, to the sound of my own breath in the darkness. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her, that figure in white, standing by the stone bench, her hand raised toward the house, toward Charlotte's window, toward me. By the time gray dawn filtered through my curtains, I had convinced myself it had been nothing, a trick of fog and lamplight, a gardener's wife taking air, a hallucination born of exhaustion and the strange, oppressive atmosphere of Greystone Manor. The rational explanations lined themselves up in my mind like soldiers, neat and comforting. But underneath them, in some deeper place I did not want to acknowledge, I knew what I had seen. And I knew it had been real. I rose, washed in cold water from the basin, and dressed in my plainest gray wool. The household was already awake when I descended to the nursery, the sound of servants moving through distant corridors, the smell of coal fires being lit, bread baking somewhere in the depths of the house. Charlotte was awake too, sitting at her small table with a book open before her, though she was not reading. She was looking out the window, her chin resting on her hand, her expression distant and dreamy. "Good morning, Charlotte," I said softly. She turned, and her face brightened. "Good morning, Miss Ashford. Did you sleep well?" "Well enough," I lied. "And you?" "I dreamed of Mama," she said simply. She was singing, the song about the garden and the moon. "Do you know it?" "I am afraid I do not," I said, sitting across from her. "But perhaps you could teach it to me." She nodded eagerly, and in a voice surprisingly pure and true, she began to sing. The words were French, something about roses and moonlight, and a lover who waits forever by a garden gate. It was the same melody I had heard the night before, drifting up from the fog-wrapped grounds. My skin prickled. "That is beautiful," I said when she finished. "Where did you learn it?" "Mama used to sing it every night," Charlotte said. "She learned it from her grandmother in Paris. She said it was about faithful love, love that never dies, even when people do." I swallowed against the tightness in my throat. "Your mama sounds like she was a wonderful woman," I said carefully. "She was," Charlotte agreed. "But Papa does not like to hear me talk about her. He says I must forget and move forward. But I do not want to forget. Is that wrong, Miss Ashford?" "No, dear one," I said firmly. It is not wrong to remember the people we love. Memory is a kind of honoring. She smiled at me with such relief and gratitude that I felt something crack open in my chest, some protective shell I had built around my heart during all those years of moving from house to house, never staying, never belonging. This child needed someone to validate her grief, to tell her that love did not have to be buried with the dead, and her father, trapped in his own anguish, could not give her that. After breakfast, which a maid brought up on a tray, I began Charlotte's lessons. She was bright, quick to learn, with a particular gift for languages and music. We worked through French verbs, practiced penmanship, read from a volume of fairy tales. She was an easy child to teach, attentive and curious, though every so often her gaze would drift to the window, to the gardens below, where the morning fog was finally beginning to lift. At midday, Mrs. Daventry came to collect Charlotte for her luncheon, which she took in the small dining room with her father. It was the only meal they shared, a concession the Duke had apparently made to maintain some fragment of parental presence. I was left alone in the nursery, and I took the opportunity to do what I had been planning since dawn. I went downstairs, not to my room, but down the main staircase, through the cold marble halls, toward the back of the house where I had seen the figure the night before. I told myself I was simply familiarizing myself with the grounds, that a governess should know the property where her charge played. But the truth was simpler and more disturbing. I needed to see that garden in daylight. I needed to prove to myself that there was nothing there. The back entrance led out onto a stone terrace, cracked with age and overgrown with moss. Steps descended into what had once been formal gardens, though they were clearly neglected now, the hedges wild and untrimmed, the flower beds choked with weeds. In the center of it all, exactly where I had seen her standing, was a stone bench, and beside it, a patch of ground where roses had once grown, their dead stalks still visible among the frost-killed grass. I walked toward it slowly, my boots crunching on gravel. The air was cold and damp, smelling of earth and decay. As I approached the bench, I saw something that made me stop. There, on the stone surface, was a fresh scatter of white petals, rose petals, though there were no roses blooming anywhere in this dead garden. I bent down, touched one. It was soft, recently fallen, real. Looking for ghosts, Miss Ashford? I spun around. The Duke stood at the top of the terrace steps, watching me. He wore a dark coat and riding boots, his hair slightly disheveled by the wind. And in the gray daylight, he looked younger than he had in his study, more human. But his expression was guarded, his pale eyes unreadable. "Your Grace," I said, straightening. "I was merely exploring the grounds. I hope I have not overstepped." He descended the steps slowly, his gaze moving from me to the bench, to the scattered petals. His jaw tightened. "You have been here less than a day, and already my daughter has infected you with her fantasies," he said. And there was bitterness in his voice, but also something that sounded like fear. "Charlotte mentioned that her mother liked roses," I said carefully. "I assume this was her garden?" "It was," he said. "She spent hours here. She loved this place. After she died, I could not bear to maintain it. I should have had it all torn out, replanted. But He stopped, turning away. "I am not here to explain myself to you, Miss Ashford." I took a breath, choosing my words with care. "Your Grace, I saw something last night. A woman in white, standing here by this bench. I do not claim to know what it was, but I saw it. And these petals, they are fresh. Someone has been here." He turned back to me sharply. "Someone," he repeated. "Not something?" "I do not believe in ghosts," I said, though I was no longer certain that was true. "But I do believe in people. And if someone is coming onto your property at night, disturbing your daughter with their presence, pretending to be your late wife, then that is a matter that should be investigated, not dismissed." Something flickered across his face, some emotion too complex to name. He moved closer until he stood only a few feet from me, and I could see the exhaustion etched into the lines around his eyes, the gray threading through his dark hair. Up close, he was devastatingly handsome, in the way that broken men sometimes are, all sharp edges and barely contained intensity. "You think someone is doing this deliberately?" he asked quietly. "Staging this, haunting." "I think it is a possibility worth considering," I said. "Has anything else unusual happened?" Objects moved? Sounds at night? He was silent for a long moment, his gaze moving over the dead garden, the rose petals, the house rising behind us with its dark windows like watching eyes. Finally he spoke, his voice so low I had to lean closer to hear. "My wife died in this garden," he said, 3 years ago, on a November night, much like this one. They found her here at dawn, lying on this bench, as though she had simply fallen asleep. The physician said it was her heart. She had always been delicate, prone to fainting spells. But he stopped, his hands clenching into fists. But there were things that did not make sense. The way she was dressed, in her nightgown and a white evening cloak, as though she had been about to go somewhere. The look on her face, not peaceful but afraid. And the fact that she had told her maid she was going to a meeting that night, though she would not say where or with whom. My pulse quickened. "A meeting," I repeated. "Did you not investigate?" "I did," he said, and there was old anger in his voice now, anger directed inward. "I questioned everyone. The servants, her friends, her dressmaker. No one knew anything, or no one would say. My wife had become secretive in the months before her death. She attended gatherings I was not invited to, received letters she would not let me see. I thought," his voice broke slightly, "I thought she was having an affair." "And was she?" I asked gently. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw pain so raw in his eyes that I wanted to look away but forced myself not to. "I do not know," he said. "That is the hell of it, Miss Ashford. I do not know. She died with her secrets, and I have spent 3 years wondering if she was betraying me, or if something far darker was happening, something I was too blind or too proud to see." The wind picked up, scattering the rose petals across the stone. I pulled my shawl tighter around my shoulders. "Your Grace," I said slowly, "these gatherings she attended, could they have been?" I hesitated, searching for the right words. "Of a spiritual nature?" His eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" "There has been a rise in spiritualism in recent years," I said. "Seances, mediums claiming to contact the dead. Some of these groups prey on grieving women, particularly those of wealth and standing. They promise contact with lost loved ones, but they are often fraudulent and dangerous." He stared at me. "You think my wife was involved with spiritualists?" "I think it is possible," I said. "If she was meeting in secret, if she was behaving strangely, if she died under mysterious circumstances, it would fit. These groups can be cultish, manipulative. They isolate their members, drain their fortunes, and sometimes worse things happen. Blackmail, coercion, even," I hesitated again, but I had to say it, "even murder if someone threatens to expose them." The Duke's face had gone pale. "The letters," he said quietly, almost to himself. "She burned them all before she died." I found the ashes in her fireplace. I thought she was destroying evidence of an affair, but if she was being blackmailed, threatened. He looked at me suddenly, desperately. Why would she not have come to me? Why would she not have told me? "Perhaps she was afraid," I said softly, "or perhaps she was ashamed. These groups are very skilled at making their victims feel complicit, guilty. She may have believed she had no way out." He turned away from me, his shoulders rigid. For a long moment he stood there, staring at the bench where his wife had died, and I could see him trying to reconstruct the past, trying to fit these new pieces into the terrible puzzle of her death. When he spoke again, his voice was rough with emotion. "If what you are suggesting is true, if someone killed my wife and has now come back, is pretending to be her to what? To frighten Charlotte? To mock me?" He turned back, and there was something almost feral in his expression. "Then I will find them, Miss Ashford, and I will make them answer for it." The intensity of his anger was frightening, but also, I realized, oddly comforting. This was not a cold man. This was a man who loved fiercely, who had been wounded beyond bearing, and who had spent 3 years trying to freeze his heart into something that could not hurt anymore. But it had not worked. The grief was still there, and beneath it, the love, complicated, guilt-ridden, but undeniable. "I will help you," I said, "if you will allow it." He looked at me as though I had said something incomprehensible. "Why?" he asked. "This is not your concern. You are here to teach my daughter, not to play detective in my family's tragedy. Because Charlotte deserves to know the truth, I said. Because she sees her mother's ghost, and you tell her she is imagining things. But what if she is not? What if someone is deliberately tormenting a 7-year-old child? I stepped closer to him, lifting my chin. And because I have learned, Your Grace, that the world is not kind to women who have nowhere else to go. If your wife was being manipulated, exploited, perhaps even murdered, then she deserves justice, and you deserve peace. He studied me for a long moment, and I could feel the weight of his gaze, measuring me, trying to decide if I was naive or courageous or simply foolish. Finally, he nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement. Very well, he said, but we do this quietly. I will not have scandal brought down upon this house, and I will not have my daughter further distressed. If we are to investigate, we do so carefully. Agreed? Agreed, I said. He held out his hand. It was a formal gesture, a sealing of our pact. I took it, and the moment my bare hand touched his gloved one, I felt something electric pass between us, something that made my breath catch. He felt it too. I could see it in the way his eyes widened slightly, the way he held my hand, just a fraction of a second longer than necessary before releasing it. I will make inquiries into the spiritualist circles that were active in London 3 years ago, he said, his voice carefully neutral. You will keep watch. If you see anything unusual, if Charlotte mentions anything new, you will come to me immediately. We will meet here in the garden after she has gone to bed. That way, we will not arouse suspicion among the staff. I nodded, trying to ignore the way my pulse had quickened at the thought of meeting him in secret, in darkness, in this place where his wife had died. It was practical. It was necessary. It was nothing more than that. He turned to go, then paused. Miss Ashford, he said, not looking at me, thank you for not thinking me mad, for not dismissing this as grief and imagination. I do not think you are mad, Your Grace, I said quietly. I think you are a man who has been living in a nightmare and has finally found someone willing to believe it is real. He glanced back at me, and for just a moment, his guarded expression softened into something vulnerable, something grateful. Then he was gone, striding back toward the house, leaving me alone in the dead garden with the scattered rose petals and the cold wind and the growing certainty that I had just committed myself to something far more dangerous than I understood. That afternoon, after Charlotte's lessons, I took her for a walk around the grounds, keeping carefully to the front of the house, away from the garden. She was delighted to be outside, skipping ahead of me, pointing out the rookery, the stables, the old stone fountain that no longer worked. She chattered happily about her pony, about the dollhouse her mother had given her, about the songs they used to sing together. I listened, filing away every detail, every mention of her mother's habits, friends, interests. At one point, she stopped suddenly, her small face growing serious. Miss Ashford, she said, do you think Mama knows I still love her? I knelt down, bringing myself to her level. I am certain of it, I said. Love does not die, Charlotte. Your Mama may be gone, but the love between you remains. It always will. But then why does she look so sad? Charlotte asked. When I see her in the garden, she looks like she is crying, like something is wrong. I chose my words carefully. Perhaps, I said, she is sad because she cannot be with you anymore. But that does not mean she has stopped loving you. Sometimes the people who love us most worry about us, even after they are gone. Charlotte considered this, then nodded slowly. I think she is worried about something, she said. I think she is trying to tell me something, but I do not understand what. A chill ran through me. If you remember anything else, I said gently, anything she might have said or done before she went away, I want you to tell me. Can you do that? She nodded solemnly. I will, Miss Ashford. I trust you. That evening, after Charlotte had been put to bed, I waited. I sat in my room with a book I could not read, watching the darkness deepen beyond my window, watching the fog creep in from the surrounding countryside until the grounds disappeared once more into that thick, muffling whiteness. At 10 o'clock, I wrapped my cloak around me and descended the back stairs, moving as quietly as I could through the sleeping house. The Duke was already there when I reached the garden, standing by the stone bench, a dark figure against the fog. He held a lantern, its light casting strange shadows across his face. He turned as I approached, and I saw he had brought papers, documents of some kind, tucked under his arm. "I have found something," he said without preamble. "Letters, not my wife's, but letters written to her. I found them hidden in her writing desk, in a secret compartment I did not know existed. I found it this afternoon after we spoke." He handed me the lantern and opened the first letter. The handwriting was spidery, elaborate, written on expensive paper. I held the light closer so I could read. "My dear Duchess," it began, "your presence at our gathering was a balm to our circle. The spirits are eager to speak with you again. Your mother's soul is restless, seeking closure for the secrets that died with her. Come to us Thursday next, at the hour of midnight. The veil is thinnest then. Yours in the eternal search, Madame Levesque." I looked up at the Duke. "Madame Levesque?" I said. "That name? I have heard it. She was a medium, quite famous a few years ago. She held séances for the aristocracy, claimed to speak with the dead, but she was exposed as a fraud, was she not?" "She was," he said grimly, "but not until after my wife's death. She disappeared before the scandal broke, and no one has seen her since. If my wife was attending her séances, if she was paying this woman—" He clenched his jaw. "There are more letters, at least a dozen. My wife attended these gatherings for months, and the tone of the letters changes. At first they are welcoming, almost loving, but toward the end, they become threatening." He showed me another letter, dated just 2 weeks before the Duchess's death. It was short, brutal. "You have made promises you have not kept. The spirits grow angry. You must bring what you owe, or face consequences you cannot imagine." I felt cold. "This is blackmail," I said. "Your Grace, your wife was being extorted." "For what?" he demanded. "Money? I have gone through her accounts. There are no large withdrawals, no unexplained expenses. What did they want from her?" "Perhaps not money," I said slowly. "Perhaps information, secrets, access to other wealthy families." He stared at me. "Or perhaps they wanted something else entirely," he said quietly. "Something that would explain why she died here, in this garden, dressed as though she were going to meet someone. Perhaps she was trying to escape them. Or perhaps," his voice dropped to barely a whisper, "perhaps they came for her." We stood there in the fog and the lamplight, the terrible possibilities hanging between us. And then, cutting through the silence, we both heard it. A woman's voice, singing. That same French melody, the song about roses and eternal love. It came from somewhere deeper in the garden, past the dead flower beds, toward the old greenhouse whose glass walls glinted faintly in the darkness. The Duke grabbed the lantern from me and started forward. I caught his arm. "Wait," I said urgently. "It could be a trap." "I do not care," he said, and there was something savage in his expression. "If someone is here, if someone is doing this, I will end it tonight." "Then let me come with you," I said. 2 sets of eyes are better than 1. He looked at me, and I saw him warring with himself, the desire to protect me fighting against the need for an ally. Finally, he nodded curtly. "Stay close," he said. We moved forward together, the lantern swinging between us, our breath misting in the cold air. The singing continued, growing clearer as we approached the greenhouse. The door stood open, hanging crookedly on rusted hinges. Inside, I could see nothing but darkness, and the shapes of dead plants, broken pots, tools abandoned to time. The Duke stepped through the doorway first. I followed, my heart hammering against my ribs. The singing had stopped. The silence was absolute, suffocating. And then, in the far corner, something moved. The Duke raised the lantern high. The light fell across a figure standing among the dead vegetation. A woman in a white dress, her back to us, her dark hair falling loose down her back. For one terrible moment, I thought it truly was a ghost, thought that everything I had rationalized away was real and standing before us. Then the woman turned, and I saw her face. She was perhaps 40, with sharp features and eyes that glittered with something calculating and cruel. This was no spirit. This was flesh and blood and malice. She smiled at us, a slow, knowing smile. "Your Grace," she said, and her voice was accented, French. "How lovely to see you again. And you have brought a friend. How very domestic." "Who are you?" the Duke demanded. "How dare you trespass on my land? How dare you torment my daughter?" The woman laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "I am Madame Levesque," she said, "though I think you have already guessed that. As for why I am here, well, your wife owed me a debt, Your Grace, a debt that was never paid. I have simply come to collect. My wife is dead," he said, his voice shaking with rage. "Whatever debt you claim she owed died with her." Madame Levesque shook her head slowly. "Oh, but you are wrong," she said. "The debt did not die. It passed to you. And I am a patient woman. I have waited 3 years. But my patience," she spread her hands, "has come to an end. You will pay what is owed, Your Grace, or I will make certain everyone in London knows the truth about your precious dead wife, about what she did, about what she became." The Duke lunged forward, but I caught his arm, holding him back. He was trembling with fury, barely controlled. "Tell me," he said through gritted teeth. "Tell me what happened to my wife. Tell me how she died." Madame Levesque's smile widened. "She was so desperate, Your Duchess," she said softly, "so hungry to speak with her dead mother. I gave her what she wanted. I opened the door between worlds for her. But she saw things she was not meant to see, learned things she was not meant to know. And when she threatened to expose me, well, the spirits can be very vengeful, Your Grace, particularly when crossed." "You killed her," I breathed. The woman turned her glittering eyes to me. "I did nothing," she said. "I merely guided her. To this garden, to this bench, and I told her that if she wanted her mother's blessing, she must drink what I gave her. A potion, I called it, for spiritual clarity. She drank it willingly. How was I to know it would stop her heart?" "Murder," the Duke said, his voice deadly quiet. "You murdered my wife." "Prove it," Madame Levesque said, and there was triumph in her voice. "You have no evidence, no witnesses. Nothing but the word of a grieving widower and a lowly governess against a respected medium. Who do you think society will believe?" She moved toward the door, but the Duke stepped into her path. "You will not leave here," he said. "I will see you hang for what you have done." Madame Levesque laughed again. "I think not," she said, "because if you move against me, I will tell everyone about the letters your wife wrote. Letters confessing her sins, letters that would destroy your family's name forever." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "Your daughter would grow up knowing her mother was a fool and a disgrace. Is that what you want, Your Grace?" For a terrible moment, I thought he might strike her. I could see his hands shaking, could feel the violence radiating from him. But then, with enormous effort, he stepped back. "Get out," he said. "Get off my property. And if I ever see you here again, I will kill you myself." Madame Levesque smiled. "Until next time, Your Grace," she said. And she walked past us, out into the fog, disappearing as though she had never been there at all. The Duke stood frozen, the lantern dangling from his hand. Then, with a roar of anguish and fury, he hurled it against the greenhouse wall. Glass shattered. The flame went out. And in the sudden darkness, I heard him break, heard 3 years of grief and rage and guilt finally tear free from whatever prison he had built to contain them. I moved toward him without thinking, reaching out, finding his shoulder in the darkness. "Your Grace," I said softly. He turned and pulled me into his arms, burying his face against my shoulder. And he wept, great, shuddering sobs that shook his entire body. I held him. This man I barely knew, this broken Duke who had lost everything and had just learned the terrible truth about his wife's death. I held him, and I let him grieve. There in the darkness of his dead wife's greenhouse, surrounded by the wreckage of the life he had once had. And I knew as I stood there with his tears soaking through my dress that I was lost, that whatever professional distance I should have maintained was gone, that I had become part of this story now, woven into its pain and its mystery and its impossible, grief-shadowed love. We did not speak of what had happened in the greenhouse, not that night, when he finally released me, and we walked back to the house in silence, the fog wrapping around us like a shroud. Not the next morning, when I saw him briefly in the hallway, and he nodded to me with careful formality. His face once again, that mask of controlled coldness. Not in the days that followed, as autumn deepened into the first edge of winter, and the household continued its quiet, orderly routines as though nothing had changed. But everything had changed. We both knew it. I felt him watching me now. At breakfast, when I brought Charlotte down to the dining room and he sat at the head of the table with his newspaper and his coffee, I could feel his gaze lifting from the page, following me as I helped Charlotte into her chair, as I smoothed her napkin, as I spoke to her in soft tones about her lessons for the day. When I took Charlotte for her afternoon walks, I would see him at the window of his study, standing motionless behind the glass, his pale eyes tracking our progress across the lawn. And at night, when the house settled into darkness, I would lie awake, knowing he was doing the same, both of us listening for sounds that should not be there, both of us waiting for the next move in a game we did not yet know how to win. Madame Levesque had not returned, but her threat hung over us like a blade suspended by thread. The Duke had told me, in a brief, terse conversation 3 days after our confrontation, that he had set inquiries in motion. He had hired a private investigator, a man who specialized in exposing fraudulent mediums to track down evidence of Madame Levesque's crimes. But such investigations took time, and time was precisely what we did not have. She had given us a fortnight to, as she had put it in a note delivered by an anonymous messenger, reconsider our position. A fortnight to decide whether the Duke would pay her silence money or whether she would take the letters she claimed to possess to every scandal sheet in London. I had asked him what was in those letters, what his wife had written that could be so damaging. He had looked at me with such anguish that I had almost told him never mind, that I did not need to know. But he had answered anyway, his voice flat and dead. She wrote about her meetings with the spiritualist circle, he said, about the séances, about the things Madame Levesque told her. Lies, all of it. Manipulation designed to extract money and loyalty. But my wife believed it. She wrote that her mother's spirit had told her she had made a mistake marrying me. That I was, he stopped, swallowed, that I was cold and unfeeling, that I did not love her as she deserved. She wrote that she was considering leaving me, taking Charlotte and returning to France. The pain in his voice had been unbearable. I had reached out instinctively, placed my hand over his where it rested on the desk between us. He had stared at that point of contact as though it were something miraculous and terrifying. "Your Grace," I had said softly, "grief makes people say and do things they do not mean." She was being manipulated by a woman who knew exactly how to exploit her loneliness, her loss. That does not mean those words reflected her true feelings. "How can you know that?" he had asked, and there was such desperation in the question. How can anyone know what was in her heart at the end? I could not answer that. So instead I had simply held his hand, there in his study with the fire burning low and the shadows gathering in the corners, and I had let him take what comfort he could from that small, inadequate gesture. When he finally withdrew his hand, he had looked at me with something in his eyes that made my breath catch, something that was not grief, not quite, but something else, something that felt dangerous and inevitable and utterly impossible given who we were and the gulf of class and circumstance that separated us. Charlotte, at least, seemed happier. She had stopped mentioning seeing her mother in the garden, though I did not know if that was because the apparitions had ceased or because she had learned to keep her visions to herself. She was thriving under my instruction, her French improving daily, her watercolors showing real promise. She had begun to laugh more, to play with an ease I suspected had been absent for a long time, and she had attached herself to me with a fierce, childlike devotion that both touched and terrified me. I knew how this would end. I would leave eventually. Governesses always did, and she would lose someone else she had come to depend upon. Unless, a small, traitorous voice whispered in my mind, unless something changed, unless the impossible became possible. I tried not to listen to that voice. I tried to focus on the present, on Charlotte's lessons and the investigation and the careful dance the Duke and I performed around each other, always proper, always distant, always aware of the current running beneath the surface. But at night, alone in my room, I allowed myself to think about what it had felt like to hold him while he wept, to feel the weight of his grief and guilt and need pressed against me, to know that for those few moments I had been what he required, not a governess, not a servant, but a woman, offering comfort to a man who had forgotten what comfort felt like. It was madness, it was dangerous, it would lead nowhere but ruin for both of us, and yet I could not stop myself from imagining it. On the 10th day after our confrontation with Madame Levesque, Mrs. Daventry came to me with a message. His Grace requested my presence in the library at 9 o'clock that evening, after Charlotte had been put to bed. The housekeeper's expression was carefully neutral, but I saw the speculation in her eyes. Servants always knew when something was shifting in a household. They saw everything, heard everything, and drew their own conclusions. I arrived at the library precisely at 9. The Duke was standing by the fire, still dressed for dinner, though I knew he had taken the meal alone in his study, as had become his habit. He turned when I entered, and I saw at once that something had changed. There was an energy to him, a barely contained urgency that crackled in the air between us. "She has made contact again," he said without preamble. "Madame Levesque. She sent another note today. She wants to meet." "Where?" I asked, closing the door behind me. "The old moorland chapel," he said. 3 miles from here, on the edge of the estate. It has been abandoned for 20 years, ever since the new church was built in the village. She says she will bring the letters. She says if I come alone, with the money she has demanded, she will hand them over and disappear. No scandal, no exposure, just gone. "You cannot trust her," I said immediately. "It is a trap." "I know," he said, "but I have to go. If there is even a chance of getting those letters back, of protecting my wife's memory and my daughter's future, I have to try. Then I'm coming with you," I said. "Absolutely not," he said sharply. "This woman is a murderess, Miss Ashford. I will not put you in danger." "I am already in danger," I said, moving closer to him. "We both are. She knows I was with you that night in the greenhouse. She knows I am involved. If you go alone and something happens to you, what do you think will happen to Charlotte? To me?" She stepped toward me, eliminating the last of the distance between us. "Let me help you. Please." He stared at me, and I could see him struggling, the desire to protect me warring with the knowledge that I was right. Finally, he nodded, but his expression was grim. "We go together," he said. "But you will do exactly as I say. If at any point I tell you to run, you run. Do you understand?" "I understand," I said, though I had no intention of running if it meant leaving him in danger. "We will leave at midnight," he said. "Dress warmly. And Miss Ashford?" He reached out, almost touched my face, then dropped his hand. "If anything happens to me tonight, you will take Charlotte and go to my solicitor in London. His name and address are in the top drawer of my desk. He will make sure you are both cared for. Nothing will happen to you," I said firmly. "We will get the letters, we will expose Madame Levesque for what she is, and we will end this." "I wish I had your certainty," he said quietly. "I have spent so many years expecting the worst, preparing for loss. I do not know how to hope anymore." "Then let me hope for both of us," I said, "just for tonight." Something in his expression softened, warmed, and for a moment I thought he might actually touch me, might close the small space between us, and I did not know what. Kiss me? Hold me? I found I wanted both, desperately, inappropriately, impossibly. But he simply nodded and turned away. "Midnight," he said. "Meet me at the stables." I returned to my room and tried to rest, but sleep was impossible. I lay in my bed, fully dressed beneath my nightgown, watching the hours creep past on the small clock beside my bed. At 1:45, I rose, pulled on my warmest cloak, and slipped down the back stairs. The house was dark and silent. I moved like a ghost through its corridors, out the kitchen door, across the yard toward the stables. The Duke was already there, dressed in dark clothes, his horse saddled and waiting. He had brought a second horse for me, a gentle mare I recognized from Charlotte's riding lessons. He helped me mount, his hands strong and steady at my waist, lingering there just a moment longer than necessary. Then he swung onto his own horse, and we rode out into the night. The fog had returned, thick and damp, muffling the sound of the horse's hooves. We rode in silence, the Duke leading the way along paths he clearly knew by memory. The countryside around us was invisible, just vague shapes of trees looming out of the mist, the occasional glow of a distant farmhouse window. It felt as though we were riding through a dream or a nightmare towards something that waited with patient malevolence. After perhaps 30 minutes, the chapel appeared before us, a dark silhouette against the marginally lighter sky. It was small, stone, its windows broken and black, its door hanging open. The graveyard around it was overgrown with weeds, the headstones tilting at drunken angles. The Duke dismounted and helped me down, then tethered the horses to a tree at the edge of the clearing. "She may already be inside," he said quietly. "Stay close to me, and if I give you any signal at all, you get on that horse and you ride back to the manor. Promise me." "I promise," I lied. We approached the chapel slowly. The door creaked as the Duke pushed it wider, the sound obscenely loud in the fog-wrapped silence. Inside, the chapel was a ruin, its pews broken and scattered, its altar crumbling, its floor covered in dead leaves and bird droppings. But there, in the center of the nave, a single lantern burned, casting a circle of golden light. And standing in that circle, waiting, was Madame Levesque. She was not alone. 2 men stood with her, large and brutal-looking, the kind of men hired to intimidate and hurt. The Duke stopped at the threshold, his body going tense beside me. "You said you would come alone," he said. Madame Levesque smiled. "I lied," she said. "Surely you did not think I would trust the word of an English aristocrat, especially one who threatened to kill me? No, Your Grace. I have taken precautions. Now, you have the money?" The Duke reached into his coat and withdrew a leather pouch. I heard the clink of coins. Madame Levesque gestured to one of her men, who stepped forward and took it, testing its weight, opening it to examine the contents. He nodded to her. "Good," she said. "Now I will give you what you came for." She withdrew from her own cloak a packet of letters tied with black ribbon. Even from where I stood, I could see the handwriting on the top letter. Elegant, feminine, the Duchess's hand. The Duke started forward, but Madame Levesque held up a hand. "Not so fast," she said. "You will notice I have only brought half of them. The other half remain in a safe place. Consider them insurance. You will pay me the same amount again 6 months from now, and every 6 months thereafter, for the rest of your life, Your Grace. That is the price of your family's good name." "No," the Duke said, his voice shaking with rage. "That was not our agreement. You said if I paid, you would disappear." "I changed my mind," Madame Levesque said with a shrug. "You are a duke. You have wealth beyond imagining. Why should I settle for one payment when I can bleed you slowly for years? You will pay, Your Grace, or I will ruin you. I will tell the world about your wife's madness, her disloyalty, her pathetic grasping at spirits that never answered. I will make Charlotte's mother a laughingstock. Is that what you want?" "What I want," the Duke said through gritted teeth, "is to see you in prison, or better yet, on the gallows." He moved forward suddenly, lunging for the letters. One of Madame Levesque's men stepped in front of him, raising a cudgel. The Duke dodged, caught the man's arm, twisted. There was a sickening crack. The man howled and dropped the weapon. The Duke bent to retrieve it, but the second man was already on him, grabbing him from behind, locking thick arms around his throat. I did not think. I simply acted. I ran forward, snatched up the fallen cudgel, and swung it with all my strength at the man choking the Duke. It connected with his shoulder. He grunted and released his hold, turning toward me with fury in his eyes. The Duke surged upward, drove his fist into the man's face. Blood sprayed. The man staggered back. "Run!" the Duke shouted at me. "Now!" But I could not run, because Madame Levesque had moved with the speed of a striking snake. She was behind me now, her hand locked in my hair, a blade pressed against my throat. I froze. "Enough," she said coldly, "or I will open her throat here and now." The Duke went absolutely still, his chest heaving, his eyes locked on me, on the knife at my neck. I saw terror there, raw and undisguised, and something else, something that made my heart break and soar at the same moment. "Let her go," he said, and his voice was barely recognizable. "Please, take the money. Take it all. Take everything I have. Just let her go." Madame Levesque laughed. "How touching," she said. "The great Duke of Greystone, brought to his knees by a lowly governess. Tell me, your grace, are you already bedding her? Or are you still pretending to be the noble widower, faithful to his dead wife's memory?" "Let her go," the Duke repeated, ignoring the venom. "I will pay whatever you want. I will sign over property, title, anything. Just do not hurt her." I felt the blade press harder against my skin, felt the sharp sting as it broke the surface. Warm blood trickled down my neck. The Duke made a sound like a wounded animal. "You want to know what I want?" Madame Levesque hissed in my ear, her breath hot and foul. "I want what your precious Duchess promised me, what she said she would give me and then tried to back out of at the last moment. I want the Greystone rubies." The Duke's face went white. "The what?" "The rubies," Madame Levesque repeated. "Your family's legendary collection, worth a fortune beyond counting. Your wife promised them to me as payment for my services. She was going to steal them, bring them to me. But she grew a conscience at the last moment, threatened to expose me instead. So I ensured she could not." "You killed her for jewels?" I said, unable to stop myself. "For money?" "For justice," Madame Levesque spat. "I gave her mother a voice from beyond the grave. I gave her comfort when her husband offered none. I earned those rubies, and now you will give them to me, your grace, or this governess dies the same way your wife did, and I promise you, her death will not be peaceful." "The rubies are in a vault in London," the Duke said desperately. "I do not keep them here. I cannot give you what I do not have." "Then you will write to your bank," Madame Levesque said. "You will have them brought here, and when I have them, I will release the girl, not before." "That will take days," the Duke said. "A week at minimum. Let her go now, and I give you my word I will deliver them to you." "Your word?" Madame Levesque laughed. "Your word means nothing to me, your grace. No, I think I will keep the girl, as insurance. One of my associates will take her to a place I have prepared. You will have exactly 7 days to retrieve the rubies. If you go to the police, if you try to find her, if you do anything other than exactly what I have told you, she dies. Do you understand?" "You cannot do this," the Duke said, and there was something close to pleading in his voice now. "She is innocent. She has nothing to do with any of this. She became part of it when she chose to interfere," Madame Levesque said coldly. "Now, are we agreed? 7 days, the rubies for the girl, or I will send her back to you piece by piece." The Duke looked at me. I saw the agony in his eyes, the impossible choice being forced upon him. Lose a fortune that had been in his family for generations, or lose me, a governess, a woman he barely knew. There was no choice, really. There could not be. But he said, with absolute conviction, 7 days. You have my word. Do not hurt her. Please." Madame Levesque nodded to her remaining henchman. He produced a length of rope. Before I could react, before the Duke could move, my hands were bound behind my back, a filthy cloth forced into my mouth as a gag. I tried to struggle, but Madame Levesque's knife was still at my throat, and I felt it cut deeper, felt more blood, hot and wet. "Do not fight," she whispered. "It will only make this harder." The henchman threw me over his shoulder like a sack of grain. I saw the Duke start forward, saw Madame Levesque block his path with the knife, now pointed at him. The letters lay forgotten on the chapel floor. 7 days, she said again. "And your grace, if you love this girl, you will pray I am feeling merciful when the time comes." Then I was being carried out into the fog, into the darkness, away from the Duke who stood frozen in the ruined chapel, away from the life I had built, away from everything I knew. The last thing I saw before unconsciousness claimed me, brought on by a blow to my head from the henchman's fist, was the Duke's face contorted with anguish and rage, and Madame Levesque standing before him like a demon carved from shadow and greed. When I woke, I was in a room I did not recognize, small, windowless, lit by a single candle. My head throbbed where I had been struck, and my throat burned where the knife had cut me. My hands were still bound, though the gag had been removed. I was lying on a narrow cot, my cloak still wrapped around me, damp with fog and blood. I sat up slowly, fighting waves of dizziness. The room was bare except for the cot, a bucket in the corner, and the candle on a small table by the door. The door itself was heavy wood, reinforced with iron. No windows, no way out. A prison. I heard footsteps outside, then the scrape of a key in the lock. The door opened. A woman entered, older, hard-faced, carrying a tray with bread and water. She set it on the table without looking at me. "Where am I?" I asked, my voice hoarse. She did not answer. She turned to leave. "Please," I said, "please, just tell me where I am. How long will I be kept here?" She paused at the threshold, glanced back. 7 days, she said. "If your Duke loves you, 7 days. If not," she shrugged. "Then it does not matter, does it?" She left. The door locked behind her. I sat on the cot, wrapped my cloak tighter around myself, and tried not to give in to the fear that threatened to overwhelm me. 7 days. 7 days for the Duke to retrieve the rubies. 7 days to decide if I was worth saving. I thought about Charlotte, sleeping peacefully in her bed, unaware that the governess who had promised to stay had vanished in the night. I thought about the Duke, faced with an impossible choice, his honor and his heart at war. I thought about my own foolishness, my reckless decision to involve myself in matters that were not my concern, to help a man I barely knew, to feel things I had no right to feel. And I thought about that moment in the chapel, when Madame Levesque had put the knife to my throat and the Duke had said with such desperate sincerity, "Let her go. I will give you everything. Just let her go." He had meant it. I had seen it in his eyes. Whatever we were to each other, whatever impossible thing had grown between us in those few short weeks, it was real enough that he was willing to sacrifice his family's legacy to save me. A governess. A woman who owned nothing, mattered to no one, could disappear without consequence. Except apparently, I did matter. To him. And God help us both, he mattered to me too. More than was wise. More than was safe. More than I had any right to allow. I closed my eyes, and I prayed, to whatever God might be listening, that he would come for me, that he would find a way, that somehow, impossibly, we would both survive this, and that when we did, we might find the courage to acknowledge what had already become undeniable. I loved him. Against all reason, all propriety, all the unbridgeable distances of class and circumstance, I loved the Duke of Greystone, and if I died in this room, I would die knowing that I had finally, after so many years of loneliness, felt something real. Outside my prison, the candle burned low, and I waited, counting the hours, for rescue or death, whichever came first. The first 2 days passed in a blur of darkness and silence. I slept when exhaustion overtook me, woke when the hard-faced woman brought food I could barely swallow, and spent the hours between trying to keep my mind from spiraling into panic. I counted the stones in the walls. I recited poetry I had memorized as a girl. I thought about Charlotte, imagined her lessons, her small hands forming letters, her voice asking questions I was not there to answer. Anything to keep the fear at bay. On the 3rd day, something changed. I heard voices outside my door, an argument in rapid French, the hard-faced woman and a man, his voice rough with agitation. I pressed my ear to the door, straining to understand. "The Duke has not gone to the bank," the man was saying. "He has not left his estate. Madame Levesque is growing impatient. She says if he does not move soon, we are to send him proof that we still have the girl." "What kind of proof?" the woman asked. "A finger," the man said coldly. "Or an ear, something he will recognize as hers." My blood turned to ice. I backed away from the door, my bound hands trembling. 3 days. Only 3 days, and already they were discussing mutilating me. What would they do when the full 7 days passed and the Duke had not delivered the rubies? Would they kill me slowly? Quickly? Would they even bother to tell him where to find my body? But something else struck me about the conversation. The Duke had not left his estate. He had not gone to London for the rubies. Why? Was he refusing to pay? Had he decided I was not worth the cost? Or was he planning something else entirely? I wanted to believe it was the latter. I needed to believe it. Because the alternative, that he had weighed my life against his family's treasure and chosen the treasure, was too painful to contemplate. That night, I had a visitor. Not the hard-faced woman, but Madame Levesque herself. She swept into my cell like a dark queen, her dress rustling, her eyes glittering with malicious amusement. She studied me for a long moment, taking in my disheveled appearance, the dried blood on my neck, my hollow eyes. "You look dreadful, my dear," she said. "I do hope you are not wasting away. That would be such a disappointment. What do you want?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. She smiled. "I wanted to see if you were worth it," she said. "Worth the price your Duke seems unwilling to pay. Tell me, Miss Ashford, what is it about you that has captured his attention? You are not beautiful, not particularly accomplished. You have no fortune, no family, no connections, and yet he looked at you in that chapel as though you were something precious." "Why?" "I have no idea," I said honestly. "I am his daughter's governess. Nothing more." "Liar," she said softly. "I know men, Miss Ashford. I have made a career of understanding their weaknesses, their desires, their secret hungers, and I saw the way he looked at you. He loves you. Perhaps he does not even realize it yet, but he does. And that," she leaned closer, "makes you valuable indeed." "If I am so valuable," I said, "then why has he not paid?" Her smile faltered slightly. "That," she admitted, "is puzzling. My sources tell me he has not left Greystone Manor since the night we took you. He has not contacted his bank in London. He has not asked for the rubies to be retrieved. It is as though he does not care. Or," her eyes narrowed, "as though he is planning something." "Perhaps he has gone to the police," I suggested, though I did not believe it. She had made it clear what would happen to me if he did. "No," Madame Levesque said. "I would know. I have eyes everywhere, Miss Ashford. In the village, in the neighboring estates, even in his own household. If he had gone to the authorities, I would already have slit your throat and disappeared. No, he is doing something else, something I have not anticipated, and I do not like surprises." She stood abruptly. "I will give him until tomorrow night," she said. "If he has not made contact by then, if he has not begun the process of retrieving the rubies, I will send him your finger. And every day after that, another piece of you, until he understands that I am not a woman to be trifled with." She left, the door locked, and I sat in the darkness, staring at my hands, at my fingers, and I felt something inside me harden into resolve. I would not wait passively for rescue or mutilation or death. If the Duke was planning something, I needed to give him time. And the only way to do that was to escape. I examined my prison with new eyes. The walls were solid stone, the door reinforced, but the ceiling was wooden, old timber that had warped with age and damp. And in one corner, where the candlelight barely reached, I could see a gap between the planks. Small, but perhaps large enough. I dragged the cot beneath that corner, climbed onto it, and reached up. My bound hands made it difficult, but I managed to work my fingers into the gap, feeling the rough wood, testing its strength. It was rotted, crumbling in places. If I could work it loose, if I could create an opening large enough to pull myself through, I might be able to reach whatever space lay above. An attic, perhaps, or access to a roof. I worked through the night, as quietly as I could, pulling at the wood, feeling it give way in small pieces. My fingers bled, my arms ached. But I kept going, driven by the image of what they would do to me tomorrow, if I did not escape. By dawn, I had created a hole perhaps a foot wide. Not large enough yet, but close. The hard-faced woman brought breakfast. I climbed down from the cot, arranged myself on it as though I had been sleeping, and waited for her to leave. When she did, I returned to my work. All through the day I labored, my muscles screaming, my breath coming in gasps. And finally, as afternoon light seeped through cracks I had not noticed before, the hole was large enough. I pulled myself up with the last of my strength, wriggling through the opening, feeling splinters tear at my dress and skin. For one terrible moment, I thought I was stuck, that I would die here wedged between ceiling and floor, unable to move forward or back. Then, with a final desperate heave, I was through. I found myself in an attic space, low-ceilinged, filled with dust and darkness. But there, at the far end, was a window. Grimy, small, but a window. I crawled toward it on my bound hands and knees, my heart hammering. The window was latched from the inside. I worked at it with my teeth, tasting rust and decay, until finally it gave way. I pushed the window open and looked out. I was high up, 3 stories at least, in what appeared to be an old warehouse near the docks. Below me, the Thames stretched dark and sluggish, and across the water I could see the lights of London beginning to glow in the gathering dusk. The warehouse was part of a row of abandoned buildings, their windows broken, their doors hanging loose. A perfect place to hide a kidnapped woman. I could not climb down. The drop was too far, the walls too sheer. But perhaps I could make noise. Perhaps I could attract attention. I looked around the attic, searching for anything I could use. My eyes fell on a broken crate, its wooden slats loose. I pulled one free, leaned out the window as far as I dared, and began striking it against the outside wall. The sound was sharp, rhythmic, echoing across the water. Again and again I struck, until my arm was numb and the wood splintered in my hands. And then I heard it. Footsteps below, running, shouting. They had heard me. They knew I was escaping. I had seconds at most before they reached the attic. I looked at the window, at the impossible drop, at the dark water below, and I made a choice. I climbed onto the window ledge, balanced there for one heart-stopping moment, and then I jumped. The fall seemed to last forever. Wind rushed past me, tearing at my cloak, my hair. I had time to think this is how I die. Time to picture the Duke's face, Charlotte's small hand in mine. The life I would never live. Then I hit the water. The cold was shocking, absolute, driving the air from my lungs. I sank like a stone, my bound hands useless, my heavy skirts dragging me down. I kicked frantically, fighting toward the surface that seemed impossibly far above me. My lungs burned. Darkness pressed at the edges of my vision. I was drowning. After everything, I was going to drown in the Thames, alone and forgotten. Then hands seized me, strong and sure, pulling me upward. My head broke the surface and I gasped, choking on water and air. Someone was holding me, keeping me afloat, dragging me toward the muddy bank. I tried to focus, to see who had saved me, but my vision was blurred, my body shaking uncontrollably with cold and shock. We reached the shallows. My rescuer hauled me onto the bank, rolled me onto my side. I coughed up river water, my body convulsing. And then I heard a voice, rough with emotion, saying my name over and over like a prayer. Miss Ashford. Eleanor. God, Eleanor, breathe. Please breathe. I forced my eyes open. And there, kneeling beside me, soaked through, his face pale with terror and relief, was the Duke. Your Grace, I whispered. How did you? How are you here? I have been here every night since they took you, he said, his hands moving over me, checking for injuries, untying the ropes that still bound my wrists. I knew they would bring you somewhere near the docks. Madame Levesque has connections in this area. I have been watching, waiting, searching every warehouse, every building. And then I heard the noise, saw you fall, and his voice broke. I thought I had lost you. I thought I was too late. My hands were free. I reached up, touched his face, needing to confirm he was real. He caught my hand, held it against his cheek, and I felt wetness there that was not river water. You came for me, I said. You did not pay the ransom. You came. I could never abandon you, he said fiercely. Never. Do you understand? I do not care about the rubies, about my family's legacy, about anything except getting you back safely. These past 4 days have been— He stopped, shook his head. I cannot describe what I have endured, not knowing if you were alive, if they were hurting you, if I would ever see you again. Charlotte, I said, suddenly remembering. Is she safe? Is she frightened? She knows only that you have been called away suddenly, he assured me. Mrs. Daventry has been caring for her. She is worried, but she is safe. And now, his jaw tightened. Now we are going to end this. Madame Levesque will pay for what she has done. I swear it. He helped me to my feet, steadying me when my legs threatened to give way. His arm around my waist was the only thing keeping me upright. He led me away from the waterfront, through narrow alleys I did not recognize, to a waiting carriage. Inside, wrapped in blankets, was the private investigator the Duke had hired. The man took one look at me, my sodden clothes, my bleeding wrists, and his expression hardened. We have her, the Duke said. Now we move on, Madame Levesque. My men have been watching the warehouse, the investigator said. When they realized you had escaped, they panicked. Madame Levesque herself arrived an hour ago. She is still inside, along with 3 of her associates, and more importantly, his eyes glinted. We have found the letters, all of them, hidden in a room on the 2nd floor of that building. Your wife's letters, Your Grace, and letters from at least a dozen other women. Confessions extracted under duress, secrets exposed during fraudulent seances, evidence of blackmail, extortion, and at least 2 other suspicious deaths beyond the Duchess. Then we have her, the Duke breathed. We can prove everything. Better than that, the investigator said. I have already contacted Scotland Yard. Inspectors are on their way now. By tomorrow, Madame Levesque will be in custody. Her entire operation will be exposed. This is over, Your Grace. The Duke looked at me. His hand found mine in the darkness of the carriage. Is it truly over? He asked quietly. Or is it just beginning? I knew he was not talking about Madame Levesque anymore. I squeezed his hand, felt the calluses, the strength, the tremor of emotion he could not quite control. I am cold, I said, avoiding the real question. And I smell like the Thames. Might we go home? Home, he repeated, and something in his voice made that word sound like a promise. Yes, let us go home. The investigator drove us back to Greystone Manor, staying well away from the warehouse where the police would soon be conducting their raid. The Duke held me the entire journey, his arms wrapped around me over the blanket, his chin resting on the top of my head. We did not speak. We did not need to. Everything that mattered passed between us in that silence, in the warmth of his body against mine, in the steady beating of his heart beneath my ear. It was nearly dawn when we arrived. Mrs. Daventry met us at the door, took one look at my condition, and immediately summoned the household into action. A hot bath was drawn, clean clothes laid out, a physician sent for, though I insisted I was well enough. The Duke refused to leave my side until the physician arrived, examined me, and pronounced me battered and exhausted, but without serious injury. Only then did he retire to his own chambers to change out of his wet clothes. I soaked in the bath until the water grew cold, washing away the smell of river and imprisonment, watching the blood and grime swirl away down the drain. When I finally emerged, dressed in a clean nightgown and wrapper, with my hair drying in waves down my back, I found Charlotte waiting outside my door. "Miss Ashford!" she cried, and threw herself into my arms. I was so worried. Mrs. Daventry said you had to go away suddenly, but I knew something was wrong. I could feel it. Are you all right? Are you staying now? I am staying, I promised, holding her tight, breathing in the clean scent of her hair. I am not going anywhere, dear one. I promise. She pulled back, studied my face with those solemn gray eyes, so like her father's. Papa has been very strange, she said. He has barely slept. He has been going out at night and not telling anyone where. And yesterday I heard him in his study and he was crying. I have never heard Papa cry before. It frightened me. My heart contracted. He was worried about me, I said gently, but everything is all right now. You must not be frightened. Do you love him? She asked suddenly, with that brutal honesty that only children possess. I froze. Charlotte, I began, but she interrupted me. Because I think he loves you, she said. He looks at you the way he used to look at Mama, before she became sad. And I think, she hesitated, then continued in a rush, I think Mama would be happy about it. I think she would want Papa to be happy again. And you make him happy, Miss Ashford. Even I can see that. Out of the mouths of babes, I thought again. This child understood more than any of us had given her credit for. I knelt down, bringing myself to her level. Your Papa is a good man, I said carefully, and I care about him very much. But there are complications. I am your governess, Charlotte. He is a duke. The world does not look kindly on such attachments. The world is silly, Charlotte said firmly. If people love each other, they should be together. That is what Mama always said. Love is what matters, not titles or money or what other people think. I smiled despite myself. Your Mama was a wise woman, I said. Now, you should be in bed. It is very late. Will you tuck me in? She asked. Will you sing to me? The way you used to? I will. I promised. I put her to bed, sang her the lullaby I had learned in my own childhood, and sat with her until her breathing deepened into sleep. Then I stood, intending to return to my own room, only to find the Duke standing in the doorway. He had changed into dry clothes, but his hair was still damp, his face drawn with exhaustion. He looked at his sleeping daughter, then at me, and something in his expression made my breath catch. "Walk with me," he said quietly. "Please, just for a moment." I followed him down the hallway, down the stairs, through the silent house to his study. He closed the door behind us, moved to the fireplace where embers still glowed, and for a long moment simply stood there, staring into the dying flames. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and raw. "I have never been so frightened in my life," he said. "Not when my wife died. Not in any moment of grief or loss or uncertainty. Nothing compares to what I felt these past 4 days, knowing you were in danger, that you might be hurt or killed, and that it was my fault, that I had brought you into this nightmare." "It was not your fault," I said. "I chose to help you. I chose to go with you that night." He turned to face me. "Why?" he asked. "Why would you risk yourself for me? For my dead wife's memory? For a child who is not your own? You owe us nothing, Miss Ashford. You could have simply taught Charlotte her lessons and kept yourself safely distant from all of this darkness. Why did you not?" I looked at him, at this man who had saved my life, who had wept for me, who had held me as though I were something precious, and I told him the truth. "Because I could not stand by and watch you suffer," I said. "Because Charlotte deserved better than a household built on secrets and grief. And because—" I hesitated, then continued, "because I have come to care for you both, more than is wise, or proper, or safe. You asked me why I risked myself. That is why. Not out of duty, not out of professional obligation, but because somewhere in these few short weeks, you became important to me, both of you, and I could not bear the thought of losing you to the past." The silence that followed was absolute. He stared at me as though I had said something in a language he did not understand, his pale eyes searching my face. Then, slowly, he crossed the space between us. He stopped just inches away, close enough that I could feel the heat of him, smell the faint scent of soap and wood smoke that clung to his skin. "Eleanor," he said, and it was the first time he had used my given name. "I do not know how to do this. I do not know how to feel again, to hope, to believe that I might be allowed happiness after everything that has happened. But when I thought I had lost you, when I saw you fall into that water, I knew that I could not go back to the way I was. I knew that you had become." He reached up, touched my face with tentative fingers as though afraid I might disappear. "Everything. Your Grace," I whispered, and he shook his head. "Julian," he said. "My name is Julian, and I need to hear you say it, please." "Julian," I repeated, and his eyes closed as though the sound caused him pain, or perhaps relief. "I cannot be your governess anymore if this is to continue. You know that. The household will talk. Society will condemn us. Charlotte will be caught in the scandal. Then you will not be her governess," he said, opening his eyes. "You will be." He stopped, swallowed. "Marry me, Eleanor. Not because you must, not because of propriety or obligation, but because I love you. God help me. I love you. And I cannot imagine spending the rest of my life without you." My heart stopped, started again, raced forward. "You cannot mean that," I said. "You barely know me. We have had only a few weeks. It is madness." "Perhaps," he said, "but it is the first thing that has felt sane to me in 3 years. Say yes, Eleanor, please. Say you will have me." I thought about all the reasons to refuse. The scandal, the gossip, the cruelty of a world that would never fully accept a governess who had risen to become a duchess. But I also thought about Charlotte's words. Love is what matters, not titles or money or what other people think. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that I would regret refusing this man for the rest of my life. "Yes," I said. "Yes, Julian, I will marry you." He made a sound, something between a laugh and a sob, and then his mouth was on mine, kissing me with a desperation that spoke of fear and relief and a hunger too long denied. I kissed him back, my hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer, tasting salt and heat, and the promise of something I had never dared to hope for: a future, a family, a home. When we finally broke apart, both of us breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine. "There will be difficulties," he said quietly. "My family will object, society will whisper, but I do not care. Let them whisper, let them judge. You are mine now, Eleanor, and I am yours. Nothing else matters." "Nothing else matters," I repeated, and I believed it. In that moment, with his arms around me and his heart beating against mine, I believed that love truly could conquer everything, that we could build something good and lasting from the ashes of grief and secrets and pain. We were wrong, of course, or not wrong exactly, but naive, because the past was not finished with us yet, and the final revelation, the last terrible truth about the Duchess's death and the curse that haunted Greystone Manor, was still to come. The news of Madame Levesque's arrest reached us 3 days later. The investigator arrived at Greystone Manor with documents, evidence, and a full account of what the police had discovered in that warehouse by the Thames. It was worse than we had imagined. Madame Levesque had not simply been a fraudulent medium preying on grieving widows. She had been the architect of an elaborate criminal enterprise, one that had destroyed at least 6 families beyond the Duke's own, draining fortunes through blackmail and coercion, and causing 3 confirmed deaths that investigators could now prove were murders disguised as natural causes or suicides. The Duchess had been one of her victims, but she had also been, in the end, something more. As we sat in the study, the Duke and I, reading through the letters and journals the police had recovered, a more complete picture emerged, a picture that was heartbreaking in its complexity. The Duchess had first attended one of Madame Levesque's séances shortly after her own mother's death, seeking comfort, seeking connection to the woman who had raised her. She had been vulnerable, isolated in a marriage that had grown distant though not unkind, lonely in a country whose language and customs still felt foreign despite years of residence. Madame Levesque had seen that vulnerability and exploited it with surgical precision. She had given the Duchess what she so desperately craved: a voice from beyond, messages of love and forgiveness, the illusion that death was not an ending, but merely a veil that could be lifted for the right price. But the price had grown steeper with each séance. First money, which the Duchess paid from her own allowance, then information about other wealthy families, which the Duchess provided, not understanding how it would be used. Then, finally, the demand for the Greystone rubies, the legendary collection that represented centuries of family history and wealth. The Duchess had agreed, caught in a web of manipulation and fear, promised that once she delivered the jewels, she would be released from her obligation, that her secrets would remain safe. But she had grown suspicious. The letters showed her mounting distress, her realization that she was being used, her growing certainty that the spirits speaking through Madame Levesque were fabrications, tricks of psychology and stagecraft. In her final letter to the medium, written just days before her death, she had made her position clear. She would not steal from her husband's family, would not betray the trust that had been placed in her. She threatened to expose Madame Levesque to the authorities, to tell everything. That letter had signed her death warrant. Madame Levesque had arranged to meet her in the garden, had convinced her that one final séance would release her from all obligations, that her mother's spirit was desperate to speak with her one last time. The Duchess, still hoping against hope that some fragment of what she had experienced might be real, had come. And Madame Levesque had given her poison in a silver cup, telling her it was a ritual drink that would open her mind to the spirit world. The Duchess had died there on the stone bench, alone except for her murderer, her white evening cloak wrapped around her nightgown, her face frozen in an expression of betrayal and fear. And Madame Levesque had walked away, leaving the death to be discovered at dawn, leaving everyone to assume it had been the Duchess's weak heart finally giving out. Julian wept as he read the letters. I sat beside him, my hand covering his, sharing his grief and his rage. But something else troubled me, something that did not quite fit with the narrative we had constructed. "The ghost," I said quietly. "Charlotte saw her mother in the garden. I saw her. We both did. If Madame Levesque was staging it, trying to frighten us or torment Charlotte, why did it stop? Why haven't there been any appearances since that first night? Julian looked at me, his eyes red-rimmed. You think it was real? He asked. You think my wife's spirit was actually there? I do not know what I think, I admitted, but I know what I saw, and I know that Charlotte saw something too, something that brought her comfort rather than fear. She said her mother looked sad, that she seemed to be trying to communicate something. What if? I hesitated, then continued. What if she was trying to warn us, to lead us to the truth? Julian was silent for a long moment, staring at the letters spread across his desk. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. There is one thing we have not done, he said. One place we have not looked. My wife kept a diary. She wrote in it every day. But I could never find it after her death. I assumed she had destroyed it, along with so much else. But what if she hid it? What if there is something there that would tell us? He stopped. Tell us what she was truly feeling, what she truly believed. Where would she have hidden it? I asked. He stood abruptly. The garden, he said, the stone bench. She spent hours there. If she was going to hide something precious, something she did not want anyone to find, that is where it would be. We went together, that very afternoon, to the garden where so much tragedy had unfolded. The November air was cold and crisp. The fog finally cleared, the winter sun casting long shadows across the dead flower beds. The stone bench sat as it always had, weathered and moss-covered, surrounded by the skeletal remains of roses. Julian knelt beside it, running his hands along the base, searching for seams, for hollow spaces. And then he found it. A loose stone in the ornamental base of the bench, one that could be removed if you knew where to press. He worked it free, and there, in the small cavity behind it, wrapped in oilcloth, was a leather-bound journal. His hands shook as he lifted it out. We sat on the bench together, and he opened it to the first page. His wife's handwriting, elegant and flowing, dated 4 years before her death. He turned to the last entry, written the day before she died, and together we read. I know now that I have been a fool, the entry began. I have allowed myself to be deceived by a woman who saw my grief and turned it into a weapon against me. There are no spirits. There have never been spirits. Only tricks and lies and my own desperate need to believe that death is not final. I see that now. And tomorrow I will expose Madame Levesque for what she is. I will go to the authorities. I will tell them everything, no matter the cost to my reputation. But I am afraid. I am so very afraid. She has threatened me, threatened to hurt my daughter if I speak. She has told me that she has powerful friends, men who could make Charlotte disappear without a trace. I do not know if she is bluffing. I do not know if I am brave enough to risk my child's safety for the sake of justice. Julian, if you are reading this, then I am likely dead. And if that is true, then you must know this. I loved you. I have always loved you. I know I grew distant in these past months, that I withdrew into my grief and my foolishness, and I pushed you away. But it was never because I stopped loving you. It was because I was ashamed of how easily I had been manipulated, ashamed of the secrets I was keeping, ashamed that I was not strong enough to simply talk to you, to tell you I was struggling. I thought I needed a mother's wisdom to guide me. I thought I needed confirmation from beyond that I was a good wife, a good mother, a good woman. But I see now that I had everything I needed here, with you and Charlotte. I see now that love does not require validation from the dead. It requires courage from the living. If something happens to me, please know that I did not betray you. Not truly. I made terrible mistakes, but I never stopped being yours. And please, please tell Charlotte that I loved her more than life itself, that everything I did, even the foolish things, was out of love for her and fear of losing her. Forgive me, Julian. And if you can, remember me not as I was at the end, lost and afraid, but as I was in the beginning, when we were young and everything seemed possible. The entry ended there. Julian closed the diary, his face wet with tears. For a long time he simply sat, the book clutched in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I put my arm around him, held him as he had held me in the greenhouse, And I let him grieve not just for the wife he had lost, but for the love that had been there all along, obscured by misunderstanding and pride and the terrible distance that grief can create between two people. "She loved me," he said finally, his voice broken. "All this time I thought she had stopped. I thought I had failed her. But she loved me. She loved you," I confirmed gently. "And you loved her. That never changed. What happened was not because love failed. It was because a wicked woman saw vulnerability and exploited it. But the love was real, Julian. It was always real." He turned to me, his eyes searching mine. "And you," he said, "do you ever doubt? Do you ever fear that what we have might be?" He struggled for words. "Built on shifting ground?" I took his face in my hands. "What we have is built on truth," I said firmly. "On honesty. On the choice to trust each other even when it is difficult. Your wife did not have that chance. She was trapped by fear and shame. But we are not trapped, Julian. We have the gift of knowing what happens when secrets are kept, when communication fails, and we will not make those mistakes." He kissed me then, soft and grateful, his arms coming around me. And as we sat there on that stone bench where his wife had died, I felt something shift in the air around us. A warmth, a sense of peace, as though some invisible presence that had been hovering, watching, waiting, had finally found release. We buried the diary with the Duchess in a small private ceremony. Julian placed it in her coffin, along with a letter of his own, words of love and forgiveness and regret for all the conversations they had never had. Charlotte placed a drawing she had made, a picture of their family together, whole and happy. And I stood beside them both, not as an outsider, but as someone who had become part of this story, who had helped them find their way through grief to something like peace. Madame Levesque was tried and convicted of multiple counts of murder, fraud, and extortion. She was hanged that winter, on a cold December morning, her final performance observed by a crowd that had once been her admirers. Julian and I did not attend. We had already moved past her, past the shadow she had cast over our lives. She had taken enough. We would give her nothing more. The scandal, when news of our engagement broke, was everything we had anticipated. Society whispered. The Duke's family objected. Letters arrived from distant cousins and concerned acquaintances, all expressing shock that a man of Julian's position would lower himself to marry a mere governess. For a time, it seemed we might be ostracized entirely, cut off from the world that had once welcomed him. But then something unexpected happened. Other families began to come forward, quietly at first, then with growing openness. Families who had also been victims of Madame Levesque's schemes. Women who had lost fortunes to fraudulent mediums. Men who had watched their wives descend into obsession with spiritualism. They thanked Julian for his courage in exposing the truth, for being willing to risk scandal and judgment to pursue justice. And slowly, the narrative began to shift. We were married in the spring, in the small chapel on the estate, with Charlotte standing as our flower girl and Mrs. Daventry weeping openly in the front pew. It was not the grand society wedding a duke would normally have. There were no hundreds of guests, no elaborate ceremony, no announcement in the Times. But it was ours, intimate and honest, and filled with the people who truly mattered. Charlotte adjusted to the change with the resilience of childhood. She called me Mama within a month, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. She seemed lighter, happier, her grief transformed into something gentler, something that honored her mother's memory without being consumed by it. We planted roses in the garden, new varieties in bright colors, and we tended them together, the three of us, turning that place of death into something living and beautiful. The ghostly apparitions never returned. Whatever spirit had walked those gardens, whatever presence had tried to reach us through the veil, it was at peace now. Or perhaps there had never been a ghost at all. Only grief and guilt, and the human need to believe that love persists beyond death. I still do not know which explanation is true, and I find increasingly that it does not matter. What matters is this. I wake each morning beside a man who looks at me as though I am something precious, who has learned to smile again, to laugh, to believe in happiness. I spend my days teaching a child who is not mine by birth, but is mine by choice, watching her grow in confidence and grace. I walk through rooms that once felt cold and haunted, but now feel like home. I have found a place in the world, a purpose, a family. It is not the life I imagined for myself all those years ago, when I first became a governess, moving from house to house, never belonging, always temporary. It is so much more. It is, against all odds and expectations, exactly where I was meant to be. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, Julian and I return to the garden. We sit on the stone bench, now surrounded by blooming roses, and we talk about the past, about his first wife, whom we both honor in our different ways, about the darkness we walk through to reach this light, about the future we are building, deliberately and carefully, on a foundation of truth. And sometimes, when the fog rolls in and the evening grows soft with approaching night, I think I hear it again, that voice, singing a French melody about roses and eternal love. But I am no longer frightened by it. If it is memory, it is a gentle one. If it is spirit, it is benevolent. And if it is imagination, well, perhaps we all need a little mystery in our lives, a reminder that some questions have no answers, that some boundaries between the living and the dead remain permeable and strange. Charlotte hears it too, I know. I see her sometimes, standing at her window, looking out at the garden, a small smile on her face, but she no longer seems sad or frightened. She seems instead comforted, as though her mother's presence, real or imagined, is not a haunting but a blessing. Last week, Charlotte asked me a question as I was tucking her into bed. She said, "Miss Ashford, I mean Mama, do you think my first Mama knows that I am happy? Do you think she knows that I still love her, even though I love you too?" I smoothed the hair from her forehead, this child who had claimed my heart so completely. "I think she knows," I said, "and I think she is glad. Love does not divide, Charlotte. It multiplies. You have enough love for both of us, and we both have enough love for you." She smiled, that radiant smile that transforms her entire face. "Good," she said, "because I had a dream last night. I dreamed that my first Mama came to me, and she was smiling. She told me she was happy I had a new Mama. She told me she loved Papa, and she was glad he was not sad anymore. And then she said goodbye. She said she did not need to visit anymore, because everything was as it should be." My throat tightened. "That sounds like a beautiful dream," I said softly. "It was not a dream," Charlotte said with the certainty of a child who knows her own truth. "It was real. She was really there. But she is gone now. Not sad gone, happy gone, like she finally found what she was looking for." I kissed her forehead. "Then I am glad," I said. "Sleep well, little one." I told Julian about the conversation later that night as we lay in our bed, the house quiet around us. He was silent for a long time, his arms around me, his breathing slow and even. Then he spoke, his voice thick with emotion. "Do you believe it?" he asked. "Do you believe she was really there? That she, what? Gave us her blessing?" I turned in his arms, looked at his face in the darkness. "I believe," I said carefully, "that Charlotte needed closure, that she needed to believe her mother approved of our family, of the changes we have made. Whether that came from a genuine spiritual visitation or from her own subconscious providing what she needed, does it truly matter? The result is the same. She is at peace. And you?" he asked. "Are you at peace, Eleanor?" I smiled, touched his face, felt the beloved contours of jaw and cheekbone. "I am more than at peace," I said. "I am happy. Genuinely, impossibly happy." "Are you?" He pulled me closer. "I never thought I could be," he said. "After she died, I thought happiness was something that belonged to my past, something I had forfeited through my failures as a husband. But you have taught me that it is possible to grieve what was lost and still embrace what is new, to honor the past without being imprisoned by it. Yes, Eleanor, I am happy." We lay together in the darkness, listening to the house settle around us, to the distant sound of wind in the trees, to the beating of our own hearts. And I thought about the strange, winding path that had brought me here, about answering a letter from a cold, grieving duke, about a little girl who saw ghosts, about a murdered woman whose secrets had nearly destroyed a family, about love found in the most unlikely of circumstances. It is a strange thing to build a life on the ruins of tragedy, to find joy in a place where death once walked. But perhaps that is the only way any of us find happiness, by walking through the darkness until we reach the light, by refusing to let fear or grief or the judgments of others determine our worth, by choosing again and again to believe in the possibility of redemption. The Duchess of Greystone was murdered by a woman who saw vulnerability as opportunity, who turned grief into currency. But she was also loved, deeply and truly, by a man who never stopped mourning her, and by a child who will carry her memory forward. And she left behind, in her final words, a gift, the truth that love persists even through misunderstanding, that forgiveness is possible, even after death, that families can be broken and remade, lost and found, ended and begun again. I am the second Duchess of Greystone now. I wear the title with humility and gratitude, knowing how much was sacrificed to bring me here. I tend the roses that bloom where she died. I raise the daughter she bore. I love the man she loved first. And I do all of it with the certainty that she would approve, that somewhere, in whatever place the dead inhabit, she is watching over us with something like satisfaction. The mystery is solved. The murderer is punished. The ghost, if there ever was one, is at rest. And we, the living, are moving forward, carrying our grief and our joy in equal measure, building something good and lasting from all that was broken. This is how the story ends. Not with tragedy, but with hope. Not with loss, but with love. Not with the past forever haunting the present, but with the past and present learning, finally, to coexist in peace. I am Eleanor Ashford, Duchess of Greystone. I was a governess who fell in love with a haunted duke. I walked through mystery and danger and grief to reach this place, and I would do it all again. Every terrifying moment, every impossible choice, because it led me here. To this man, to this child, to this life, to home.